Mondays myself, because I just feel like it's just good to like kind of divvy things up. But with that, let's jump into it. 3 points as usual, right? So the first point is just number 1, is there anything unclean in you, right? So that's going to be point 1. This is about that section where the guy, the demoniac, right, in the Gerasenes, he's possessed by a demon, and basically Jesus says, "Come out of him, you unclean spirit." And let me just look at my notes real quick. And then when he's saying that, this is actually the word in Greek. It's akatharto, and it actually, if you look in what's called like a lexicon, it's like a kind of a dictionary for Greek words, and it's not exactly a dictionary, but just a discussion of how Greek words are used. And this is basically like how pastors study Greek, right? Like they look at how that word has been used in other places in the Bible. But when you look at it, the word akatharto, it means that the man is demon-possessed because there's moral impurity in his life, right? So that's the interesting thing. It's not like in this scripture, when you look in the Greek, he's not just demon-possessed because of like some arbitrary or random act. It's not like, when I read it in the Greek, it doesn't look like it's an accident. It looks like there was something that he had done, right? And even in English, it says, a man with an unclean spirit. And when you look at verse 8 again, for he was saying to him, Jesus was saying to the man over and over, "Come out, you unclean spirit." There is an uncleanness. And there are times in the New Testament where Jesus says it's not like this person had sinned, so he was sick or something like that. But in this section, it's possible. But ultimately, we realize that he has a evil spirit. The evil spirit's name is Legion, right? I don't know why Legion was able to come into him, but obviously, I think we've all heard this a lot growing up. Legion is not one, but it's many, right? And then that's what he says in verse 9. And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs and let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. Amen? And so the first question very simply is, you want to ask the youth, like, none of them are demon-possessed, but is there anything in your, like Legion's a normal human being, obviously, right? And then after he's saved by Jesus, or Jesus helps him, right? He's just a normal person. But even myself, in all of our lives, it's not like we're demon-possessed. I hope not, but sometimes you do go to retreats and you see like 1 or 2 youth who are. But even still, even myself, right? Like, there are things that probably Jesus can set us free from, amen? Like, not a full-on fledged demon, right? Like, to be possessed is not easy, I believe. That's difficult. Like, you have to not know the Lord, but definitely you can still be like, strongly influenced by various things like materialism, like selfishness, lust, greed, right? Like ego, probably something I struggle with a little bit. Like anger is usually a byproduct of something traumatic in our past or something that happened, but pleasing other people, right? There's all sorts of things. When you look closely, just like Legion was kind of possessed by a demon, we ourselves, though not fully possessed, can still probably have Jesus come into our lives and set us free from something else. Does that make sense, right? Like, so not necessarily a full-fledged demon, but something that is not of the Lord. And, like the Apostle Paul talks about it often in Corinthians, like flee yourselves from these temptations like idolatry, lust, like sexual immorality, jealousy, like greed, all these things, right? Like these vices. And so very simply, that's the first point. What is a vice that the Lord can set you free from? Amen? So that's going to be point 1. Point 2 is going to be this. So when we follow the arc of this particular progression, of this section I'm going through, verse 5, 1 through 6, is actually 4 segments, right? And I think you might have seen it, and I think we all know I don't like to do 3, but here's how it is. It's the section with the demon possession is going to be verse 5, 1 through 20, right? And then there's a second section where Jesus is getting asked to come. Jairus is asking him to come and heal his daughter, right? But I'm going to go like this, right? Because it's one section, but it's intercut by another section, right? Where Jesus, on his way to heal Jairus' daughter, there is the woman who has had the bleeding for the 12 years, right? So in general, that's going to be 3 sections right there. And then finally, I have the area where Jesus is returning to his hometown, and he's trying to do miracles and stuff like that, but he can't do a ton, right? He can only do a few because there are people who knew him when he was younger, and they're making it difficult for him to do ministry, right? But with that, the second section I'll jump into is going to be actually the woman who need the healing in her body, right? And so I think we all know this story, right? This woman, she was bleeding for 12 years. She had the discharge of blood. That's what it says in verse 25, right? And kind of a very sad story. And it was on Jesus' way to healing Jairus' daughter, right? Because he had gotten the call from Jairus, who is a synagogue leader, most likely Jewish, asking him to help him. But what's so sad about the woman is that, it's a good story in the sense that like Jesus ultimately heals her, right? But when I was reading it this time around, and like I'm sure we've all read it before, it's a very unique story. It's interesting because, and this will kind of be on the third point I share, but on his way somewhere, like he has a mission, but on his mission, like another one comes up, and it's equally as important. So that's interesting. But I guess I do want to focus on the woman here. That'll be the second point. When you read these scriptures, right, there's different perspectives you can take. Who do you identify most with, right? Like, do you identify with Jesus? Do you identify with the crowd, right? Do you identify with Jairus, or do you identify with the woman? But I think most people will identify with the woman here, right? And in that sense, she's been bleeding for 12 years. No one knows why. It doesn't say whether or not she was in sin. It's not very clear as to what triggered it, but we do know she's in a lot of pain. But the sad point, I think, is here in verse 25. Verse 26, and it says, "And who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse," right? And then if you keep reading, verse 27, "She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him," weather's nice today, "and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment, for she said, 'If I touch even his garment, I'll be made well.' And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, 'Who touched my garments?'" Right? But I think what it's this is something a lot of people can relate to. This is something that happens in society a lot. If people are sick, I feel very bad for them, but this is definitely something everyone can relate to. But the woman she had this disease, but she had spent everything she had, right? And she had went to these physicians. She used up all the money she had, right? It appears that she had used great effort, and if it's been 12 years, it looks like it's been ailing her for a long time. But in life, myself included, I think that there are always things, myself or anyone else, we're always asking God for, like we need help with, right? Like we're people, and that's just how we are, right? Some of us, a lot of people, especially as you get older, not everyone when they're younger, but everyone as they get older, you become a little bit more broken, or something bad happens, or like if you're a youth and you grow up and you don't have like your father or your mother around or something, you might need a little bit more love or care in that area, or you know, like sometimes some people struggle financially. Like, everyone has a need, you know, like at a certain point. But when you look at this passage, this woman, she tried her best to fulfill that need through worldly means, but that was not accomplished. So with that, just the point 2 is going to be very simply, what is it in your life, right? So it's similar to point 1, but slightly different, right? So point 1 was, like, is there some kind of sin or something kind of uncleanness, some akar tharto, right? That God can clean you of. But point 2 is there a need, right? Something you need God to help you with, touch you or heal you. So it's similar but different, right? So point 1 is like, is there some kind of vice or sin that God could possibly purge you from, right? Proverbs says, beatings and wounds cleanse the soul, right? They clean the innermost being. We're all sinners in Jesus, so we all need to be healed or cleansed of that, right? But point 2 in this section in verses 24 through 34, it's more of like not so much God kind of like casting out the demon in you, right? Which is kind of like what point 1 is. Not 100%, but kind of, right? But I mean, like, obviously none of our youth kids have demons, but it's about God's, you know, like, kind of like setting us free from sin. But point 2 is more about, is there in your life, like, where you're lacking, like in Korean or pujok, right? Where you just really need God to help you, you know, like, you just need God's mercy, like, almost his sympathy, like, you need his compassion, right? Like, there is something that's ailing you. You've needed God's help for a long time, right? Like, it's hard to say, like, maybe like your parents are struggling financially. It's not sin or anything, but you just need God to come in that area. Maybe like some of the youth kids, their parents